Welcome to this special episode of the Money to the Masses podcast with me, your resident expert, Damien Fay. And interestingly, not Andy this week, but I've got something very special. We've got Pete Matthew. Now, there'll be quite a few people who listen to the Money to the Masses podcast who will know who Pete is. Now, Pete is a very good friend. We've actually got to know each other over the course of a number of years, really because we've both been, I'd like to say, sort of leading lights, visionaries in our respective field of finance. Now, I'm going to welcome Pete to the podcast, first of all, before we go on to the reason why this podcast is about Pete and what he's been up to. So, hello, Pete. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, mate. Great to be here, as ever. I definitely consider you a leading light, by the way.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I'm not often called a leading light. I'm sometimes called other things. I think by people who are slightly jealous. And but it's great to talk to you because you've been up to some exciting stuff in the background. Now, people who have listened to my other podcast I did, which was the One Giant Leap podcast, if you haven't, go back and listen to that series because Pete featured. And the reason Pete featured is because of the interesting stuff he's done around podcasts and videos over the years, and really is the foremost financial podcaster in the UK. How many times has your podcast been downloaded, Pete?
1.65 million.
Look at that, 1.65 million. Ridiculous number.
Sounds good to say it.
Well, you've earned it. But Pete has been up to something else interesting, and he has written and just... Is it out now, Pete? You've got a book that's coming out. So
17th of September. So whenever this goes out, man, 17th of September is launch date, yeah.
Yeah, so that is tomorrow if you're listening to this podcast as it comes out. So Pete has been doing podcasting. He's been financial planning for a number of years. So I'm going to let Pete explain exactly what the book is about, how he's got to this point. But probably for those of people who don't know who Pete is, and this loving that's going on. Pete, just briefly explain who you are and what you do.
I love you too, mate. Okay, well, I'm a chartered financial planner. So I've been doing my work across, I say chartered financial planner as if everybody knows what that is. Basically, I'm a financial advisor, practicing day-to-day financial advisor, and I've been doing that job for 20 years and love it to bits. But the reason you and I know each other is that I started shooting videos back in 2010 explaining how money works, which is not far off, probably about the same time that you were starting to write in earnest for Money to the Masses. And then I shot 300 videos, most of them in fields and on cliffs and on beaches, because I live in the beautiful west of Cornwall. And then in 2012, I became a consumer of podcasts, fell in love with that medium, and thought I'd have a go at that as well. So I began the Meaningful Money podcast at the back end of 2012, kind of faffed around with it a little bit for a while, and then made the decision to go weekly in April 2013. And 275 episodes, 1.65 million downloads later, and now I've written a book. So it's weird. Lots of cool things have come out of just deciding to set up a video camera on the prom in Penzance back in 2009.
I remember those videos because you did win awards within the industry for them, I remember, and that's how I kind of got to know who you were. And it was 2010 when I started Money to the Masses, so that's over 8 years ago.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, so just by putting stuff out there and having the idea of wanting to help people is really one thing that we share in common. So you've done the podcast, you've obviously done the videos, you're actually experimenting with video again.
Yeah.
You're back doing some video, I see.
Yeah.
So the book, how did the book really come about? Because what is the title of the book, first of all?
Well, it's imaginatively named The Meaningful Money Handbook, and we sort of plumped for that because it sort of gives the impression that it's super practical, which it is, because that's the whole point, right? Theory without action is no good at all.
So that's why we've got a podcast on it, because if you think about it, it's a handbook for sorting out your money, which is what the theme of my podcast is about and Pete's podcast. So it seems I suppose, a natural extension of what you have been doing to write the book.
It is. It came about because I interviewed a guy called Daniel Crosby, who's a behavioral finance specialist in the States, and I interviewed him because his publisher had approached me, or his PR people. You know, I'm sure you're the same, Damien. I get requests all the time for people wanting to come onto the show, and I'm extremely picky about who does make it onto my show.
So sorry to interrupt there, Pete.
That's all right.
But regular listeners will know that you're probably the only person I've let on. I get requests every week.
Yeah, well,
from CEOs and when we spoke about 6 months ago about you doing this, and I said, yeah, of course you got to come on and we'll talk about it. So yeah, we don't let people on this podcast. So there you go.
Yeah, you know, I'm picky, but not as picky as you. I'm deeply honoured, mate. Thank you. So basically, after I interviewed Dan Crosby, his publisher then got in touch with me and said, "Hey, Pete, have you thought about writing a book?" And I've always wanted to do it. And I think my dad was, he's a retired church minister, and he wrote half a dozen sort of theological books back in the 80s. And I grew up because we had his book covers framed and they were on the landing and I had to walk past them on the way to and from my bedroom door. So I kind of grew up in the house of an author, and I suppose it's just kind of in my DNA. My dad was a teacher before he was a minister. He still really is a teacher at heart, incredible ability to explain stuff, and that's in my DNA as well. And so because of that, I've always wanted to do it. But I think, you know, the framework provided by a publisher has really helped me. You know, when you've got a deadline to work to, it certainly does focus the mind. Whereas if it was just me doing it on my own, there's plenty of other stuff that seemed to get in the way. So they approached me and I said yes, and here we are nearly a year later.
And who was the publisher? You might as well name them.
Yeah, it's Harriman House.
Okay. So they approached you, you said, great idea. You've been doing this anyway, been helping people with their finances. So you've got the book idea, and I'm talking from somebody who has done a book previously as well. How did you distill or what to put in the book? Because the world of finance, personal finance, financial planning is enormous. The scope is so wide. Yeah. And you could have got to the point where presumably this book could have been like the Yellow Pages. So how did you decide what was going to go into it?
Yeah,
before we get on to what is in it, how did you decide?
That's a really good question. Harriman House asked me for the book of the podcast, okay, because I went to and fro, back and forth with them for a while, saying, well, surely every book on personal finance has already been written. You know, what can I possibly add which hasn't already been said? And they said, well, look, you know, you have a knack of distilling whatever you're talking about down to what you need to know and what you need to do. And they basically helped me realize that I'd already written the book. I just needed to kind of whittle it down out of 250 odd at the time podcast episodes and all the video scripts and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of had the nuggets there. And every episode of the Meaningful Money podcast, except when I interview somebody, is split into two sections: everything you need to know and everything you need to do. And so it's like, right, understand this stuff about whatever, pensions, annual allowance first, whatever I happen to be talking about. And in light of that knowledge, this is what you need to do. And that has become the framework for the podcast, but importantly now for the book as well. So how did I whittle it down? Well, I believe, certainly in my particular field, which is, you know, taking control of your money with budgeting, spending, insurance and investing, that sort of stuff, which is a little bit different to the kind of stuff you talk about, but complementary, obviously. And I know you do cover a lot of that stuff as well, Damien. But on my particular stuff, the kind of things that I advise my clients on, that's what I wanted to deal with. And I wanted to just basically write the book that would be enough for the vast majority of people and not include all the stuff that most of us don't need to know about. Most of us don't need to know about complex offshore tax planning with trusts and stuff like that, right? Most of us just need to spend a bit less, save a bit more, take out some rudimentary insurance to protect against the worst, and just get on with it and keep doing that day in, day out. So I wanted it to be what most people need to know and do without all the extraneous stuff, so that it wasn't the size of the Yellow Pages.
Now, I mean, I've read the book and I liked it enough to endorse it, which I don't get anything out of that, by the way. When people see that I endorsed the book, it's a very good book. And if there's anybody whose book I knew would be worthwhile reading, it would be Pete's, because I quite like the way that theme you say about everything you need to know and everything you need to do runs through the whole book. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the book, to give people a steer of what the book, how it's broken down, you break it down into 3 parts, don't you? Generally,
Yeah.
There's the one section is I'm talking about the core of the book.
Yeah.
There's obviously bits around the outside, but there's you spend less than you earn. That's one section with various chapters within. The second part is insure against disaster, and the third section is invest wisely. And now within that, there's obviously lots of sections and lots of topics you cover, but then there's each of those subtopics. You look at that, everything you need to know and everything you need to do, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And those 3 steps really are the ultimate distillation to me. I don't know about you, Damien, but when you produce a podcast week in, week out, it really does focus your thoughts and it refines them. That's what I found. And I tend to find myself repeating the same things often. And it was those 3 things. I think, okay, what is really, or what are the key steps to financial success? What are the things that if you repeat week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out, what are those things that will guarantee financial success? And I basically got it down to spend less than you earn, insure against disaster, the stuff you can't control, and then invest wisely. And of course, there's tons of detail behind that. But if I had to put it on the back of a postage stamp, that's what I would write. And if you nail those 3 things consistently, you've cracked it, really. And of course, then the detail is where the magic is.
And we'll get on to some of the bits in a moment. But one of the other themes that I liked is it's not about getting rich. It's about being financially secure is another sort of theme in the book. And you talk about the mindset. I think, do you call it the money mindset or something like that in the book? So could you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, the thing about achieving financial success, achieving financial freedom, is that it usually takes a while, quite a long while, very often multiple decades. Of course, for some people it doesn't. It happens overnight with a lottery win, or if you're, an 18-year-old football prodigy or whatever. But usually, certainly they are massively the exceptions rather than the rule. And very often that doesn't end well. There's plenty of stories about lottery winners who are more unhappy than they were before they win. Plenty of stories of lottery winners and footballers going bankrupt and stuff. So, quick wealth very often is counterproductive. So because wealth building takes a long time, you do have to get in the zone. And so we need to have some idea of what we're aiming at. What does financial freedom really look like? And it's usually not limitless resources. Usually it's just having enough to be able to live, a reasonable lifestyle, a comfortable lifestyle, to be able to help out our family where we need to, and not to owe anybody anything. That's usually what most people would describe sort of financial freedom, not have to work, So, and then, of course, you've got to get there, and getting there requires each day to be making good decisions, right? And having some kind of an end goal helps you in the here and now to make the right decisions, not to buy the latest shiny thing off Amazon or Apple or whatever, and instead maybe, I can make do with the one I've got and invest that money instead. And sure, we should absolutely balance living for now and living and putting money aside for one day. But it's about a day-to-day laser focus, which is informed by a nice picture of what that one day might look like. You've got to get into that mindset. Otherwise, there's just too many distractions these days. So it's about sort of setting your stall out and learning how to stick to the path day in, day out.
And one of the other points I quite liked is that it's very deliberate, isn't it? The point of financial planning, and if you want to be financially secure, and you make the point in the book actually about you have to have that focus to be able to make it actually happen. It's not going to happen by luck. So you have to go and build a plan to be able to get that financial future.
Yeah, and that plan can be more or less detailed. I mean, it depends on, if you're 22, you're just out of university, then really the financial plan would say one sentence. It's like spend as much as you can. Sorry, not spend. Definitely not spend as much as you can. Save as much as you can. And, try not to get into too much debt, stuff like that. But the nearer we get to retirement, so I'm 43 now, my eldest daughter's about to go to university, my youngest is 15, so I'm within sort of 5 or 10 years of being shot of the kids, finally. And so my mind is immediately focusing, okay, right, now I'm probably certainly within 20 years of retiring, so I can really start to see that, and I can know what I have to do now. But the last 15 years have been about raising the kids and all the costs and stuff that come with that, saving for them. So, life changes, and financial planning can be more or less detailed depending on what life stage you're at. The earlier you start, obviously, the better.
I remember you saying about financial plans when you're young and you leave universities. Mine in hindsight was spend as much as you can.
Yeah, mine too.
and that's funny enough. You kind of almost mention that in the book, don't you? I think it's in the preface, and you're saying about how I like the fact that what makes it accessible, and I think what both you and I do is that we are open to the idea that we're not perfect and nobody is perfect. And I think a lot of people out there, some people have put off reading books about money because they feel it's going to be very almost dictating, and it's going to make them feel in fear, which I liked about your book, because I know it doesn't do that, because it just gives you the almost recipe of how to go from to get that financial security. Now, one thing, let's move on to what's in the book, okay? And I want to go on to something from each section, because we're not going to tell you what's in the complete book, obviously, but we're going to give you a bit of a feel. So, Pete, on the spend less than you earn part of the book, can you just give people a flavour, like a sort of a little tidbit from there?
Yeah, sure. So, spending less than you earn, first of all, there's two ways to do that. You can either spend less or earn more. And we live in unprecedented times with the sort of maturity of the internet to make more money than we earn from our day job. I'm a big fan of a guy online called Gary Vaynerchuk, and he's always talking about, well, look, you go to the free ads and find stuff that people are giving away for free and then flip it on eBay and make a bit of money that way. You might think, oh, that sounds like hard work. But if it's another 250 quid a month or 150 quid a month, then maybe it's worth doing. So you can spend less or you can earn more. I focus on the book on financial controls, so spending less, and that requires you to set a budget. But easily the most transformational tip for me, and I cringe when I say this because it's so obvious in hindsight, but I never really got the fact that you could have more than one current account. Right? Some people are thinking, really? This guy's a 20-year financial advisor? Right. In my defense, this was when I was newly married. And one of the first things my wife set up was that we should have two current accounts. So we would be paid into one, and we would work out exactly what the direct debits would be, because they're mostly the same from month to month, utility bills and stuff like that. And they would go out of the account that we got paid into. So we had money in, we knew what all the standing orders and direct debits would be, and we sort of left that amount in there. And then whatever was left would be our spending money for the month. And so we would just physically move that into another bank account. And that meant that you don't have to spend time budgeting for electricity, because that's kind of paid for. You've set aside the money for that. And part of setting aside money should be paying yourself first, something that I repeat quite a lot in the book. So if you are saving into ISAs or pensions or whatever, then do that out of that sort of bills account, so that stuff goes out straight away as soon as you get paid and you're not used to having that money to spend. And then just spend and budget what's in your spending account. And that means you've probably only got a handful of categories. You've got groceries, which includes food and, loo roll and stuff like that. Then, maybe you've got dentist or vet's bills, or, maybe you go on holiday and you've got sort of expenditure for that. It means you don't have many actual categories to budget. And it just decimates the amount of time that it actually takes to set a budget, simply having to bank accounts. And it was transformational for me. So it's just the obvious thing to put into the book, because if it didn't occur to me all those years ago, maybe it hasn't occurred to somebody else, and they're trying to sort of battle with, well, I know I've got 300 quid worth of bills still to go out this month, and I just need to make sure that my balance is enough to cover that. And I think just make it easier for yourself by having two accounts. It worked for me.
That idea is effectively automating, isn't it, what you do with your money, and that is, it's setting things up which you can build upon. It's like those foundations, isn't it? And one of the problems I find with financial services is, because the way a lot of financial services work, they only make money from you if you buy a product from them or use their service. That whole idea that they're holistic is not, they may say they are, but they don't actually ever deal with the element of budgeting, which is one of the core principles because they don't make any money from you at that point. So, but it is the foundation. So absolutely, I can see why it's in there. And there are books I've read about finance or blog posts or whatever it is, where people just focus on the high end, like you said early on in the podcast, which probably only relate to about 1% of the people out there, but they feel it makes them look intelligent. So I think it's a great, you may say it sounds obvious, Pete, but we're all having to battle with that idea of budgeting, and I still do to this day.
And we don't teach this stuff in school, right? You're not born knowing how to drive a car, so it strikes me as ludicrous that you're sort of expected to understand when either you go off to uni for the first time and you get used to paying rent, or when you go into the workplace, that you kind of are supposed to know this. I wasn't taught anything about financial management by my parents. My wife taught me everything I know. And because she was so good at it, I used to close my eyes when I went to the cash machine as a student because I had no idea whether it would give me any money or not. I had zero financial control. And we need to teach people this. We need to teach it, I think, ideally at the tertiary level, so 16, 17, 18, before we go out into the workforce, and make it real for folks. So, yeah, maybe it isn't obvious. It's obvious to me now because I've been doing it for 20-odd years. But people need to know this stuff, really, because it really is. It underpins everything, even my richest clients, because I don't generally deal with lottery winners. They have earned it and they've put money away year in, year out. They've just spent less than they earn and they've saved it. That's how they've built the wealth they've got.
So if we move on to the second part of the book, you talk about insure against disaster. Now, that's quite a broad part of the book, but just give people a feel for what that actually means.
Sure, yeah. So, you can put in place fantastic controls by watching your spending, things like that. Step 3 of the book, as we'll come to in a minute, is about building wealth for the future. But I use the analogy, there's a very famous story in the Bible. It's one of the parables that Jesus says. And basically he talks about the wise man and the foolish man. And the wise man builds his house on the rock, all right, on a sure foundation. When the storm and the wind comes and stuff, it stays where it is because the house is built on a sure foundation. The foolish man builds his house on the sand, and when the storms and the waves come, it just gets washed away. So, you can have good control, but there's no point building for the future unless you've got a sure foundation. And that's the sort of analogy that I use for taking out some basic insurance. Now, nobody likes insurance, Damien, right? We pay it hoping that we'll never, ever need it. We'd all have no problem thinking of better stuff to do with the money we pay on our house and car insurance. But when we need to claim, then we're glad we've got it. And the thing about building wealth is it is entirely dependent on our ability to earn an income, really. So when you think about it, there are 3 major risks that we face as individuals. One is dying early, and that obviously sucks for many reasons, right? But obviously it has financial implications, particularly if we have family. Then there is contracting something which people in my world call a critical illness, which tend to be your nasties: cancer, heart attack, stroke, multiple sclerosis, that sort of thing. But actually, you're quite likely, and more likely than ever, to survive those, but which will have potentially at least a catastrophic impact on your ability to earn an income, even if it's only in the short term only, maybe 2 or 3 years while you get better, maybe even 6 months. But it might be that you never return to work. So early death, critical illness, and then just being unable to work, maybe because of debilitating depression or ME, but where it's not a critical illness in the true sense of that word, but it still has massive impact on your ability to go to work and earn a living. So those 3 things really have the potential to completely derail your wealth building for the future. Fortunately, they can all be insured against to a greater or lesser extent. Problem is that costs money, and so most of us, myself included, end up compromising between covering them all to the greatest possible extent and making the premiums affordable. So in the book, I talk about, how insurances for the 3 risks work, and then give some idea about how to prioritize them depending on what life stage you're at. So, and then how to sort of put it all together and come up with a program which balances affordability and good protection.
And again, it goes back to that idea of there is no perfect financial plan, as you say. You have to tailor it to your own circumstances. So. And I think sometimes people feel that they're always looking for perfection, or feel that there is one, and therefore they feel that whatever they do is going to be inadequate. But it's adaptive, because as you mentioned in the book as well, about the idea that these things can change. You flex them. You use the term flex actually in one of the sections about I think it's in the investment, in the risk section, and about flexing and being able to change these things based upon where you are in life. And that's like all good plans. They need to change. They need to, like you say, you've got to protect them. So that's the second part. Now we get on to the third section, which is, I mean, had I been writing this particular book, the Invest Wisely section is one of those that could have been an absolute beast, couldn't it? It's one of, it's there's so much scope, and I mean, I write a lot about investing and talk a lot about investing, and the idea of writing a book on investing it's in itself daunting, because you've got to have to take a stand on something, aren't you? And of course, explain to me or the listeners about how you tackled investing in the book.
Yeah, I mean, this was easily the most difficult section to write, and the one that went back and forth between me and the editor quite a few times, because, again, trying to distill it, like you say, was a real challenge. Now, I have a view on investing. I'm not saying it's the right one, because I think there are as many different views on investing as there are people who do investing. So I know you're a big fan of momentum investing, which clearly works. It's, it just obviously does. You'd be an idiot not to believe that it doesn't. Most people, I figure, reading the book, want to be reasonably involved with their finances, and they want to sort of build for the future, but maybe they don't want to be super hands-on. Most of my clients are like that, Damien. That's why I have a job, right? They want to sort of hand over day-to-day responsibility for investment management and stuff to me. And we have a view here at my practice, Jackson's Wealth Management down in Penzance, and that has informed my view in the book as well. And it isn't rocket science, but for most people, it'll do perfectly well. And I call it multi-asset investing. The industry's increasingly calling it that. And that simply means you hold lots of different kinds of stuff spread all around the world. You sort of balance the weights between different kinds of stuff depending on your time scale and your risk profile. So if you like a bit of risk, or you're investing for the longer term, then you would dial up the equities exposure, the shares exposure. And basically you set it. And for the most part, forget it. You maybe look at it once a year. Because most people, that's what they've got the time and inclination to do. Clearly, if you're an enthusiast, then you can go as deep and as dirty into it as you want. Those people generally don't come to me, and those people generally don't listen to me from any podcast for that stuff, because I tend to preach fairly hands-off multi-asset investing. And so in the book, I talk about the different levels, all the way from the underlying assets, shares, bonds, gold, all that sort of stuff, property, and then the different, how funds work, which enable you to spread your money probably wider than you can by buying individual stocks, and then different kinds of tax accounts, so pensions, ISAs, and all the other ones, and then platforms and how and when they might be useful. And that's kind of like a hierarchy, like a structure of investing that most people these days seem to adopt. And again, just trying to cut out all the stuff that you don't necessarily need to know, while hopefully whetting people's appetite enough to get going and actually take action on this stuff. So it was a challenge, this section, for sure. But I think that I've sort of given most people what they might need to know, including then how to keep an eye on it going forward, how to review a portfolio, when and how to change stuff, and when to leave well alone. So yeah, definitely the most challenging, but arguably one of the most enjoyable bits, I think.
And you don't say to people that this is the best, as you suggested just now, because there are lots of different ways to invest. And some people do like hands-off. Some people want to just track the market. And I think there is... I was quite pleased to see that you took that view, because obviously you're going to have an in-house view with what you do, because you've obviously got to be able to service a number of clients. But it was good to see how you'd gone through it, explained it, and show people how a chartered financial planner would do it. So it was very interesting, but it's definitely not. I don't want people to think, if they are interested enough to look at Pete's book, I don't want them to think that this is some form of promotion for financial advice, because it's not. In fact, at the end of the book, I'd said to Pete before we went on air that I was going to ask him about the section at the end of the book, and it was about when you need an advisor. And because Pete does share many views as I do about financial advice, and so I've got to let Pete just elaborate on that just slightly? I don't want to ruin the book for anybody if they read it,
No,
but
no.
just elaborate on the end part.
Something of a soapbox of mine. This I recently, I think it's episode 270 of the podcast, was called "A Rant About Financial Advice," and pleasingly, I had loads of positive comments from the good side of my profession, because the bad side don't listen to podcasts. You know, they just get on and try and flog people high fee charging products and stuff. I am more convinced now, after 20 years of doing my job and 8 years of doing Meaningful Money, that most people don't need financial advice, at least until the point when they're thinking of retiring. Now, why do I say that? Well, you know, we're in the internet age now, so you certainly don't need a financial advisor to arrange an ISA or a pension for you. You can do that in like 5 minutes or less on any one of a multitude of online platforms. And those same platforms will give you a steer on how to invest the money underlying. You can, you know, take out life or critical illness or income protection insurance on any one of a number of cost comparison sites, and there are online specialist brokers that can help you with it. So you can do tons of this stuff yourself. Really, financial advice has moved on a long way from arranging products. We're not brokers anymore. In fact, I once threw out a rep from Standard Life, as it happens, who continued to calling us brokers. This is years ago now. And I said, you need to leave, because if you keep calling me a broker, you clearly don't understand what I do. And we're not brokers. You can buy products yourself. And you can buy products, dear listener, yourself, as long as you're a little bit informed about what it is you need and the things you need to look out for. And that's obviously the point of the book and the point of Meaningful Money. The point of Money to the Masses, we're just trying to get information out to people so that they can help themselves. Now, when you get to retirement, most of us sort of amass a few different pension funds, maybe from a few different employers, or, you know, we're not quite sure where our state pension sort of kicks in, or how much it'll be, or what form it'll take. And, you know, maybe we'll inherit at some point. And, you know, what about care fees? Oh, God, there's so many things to hold together. So I do believe firmly that at retirement, particularly with the pensions freedoms and all the complexity around that, that a good advisor can justify their fees many, many times over in stopping you from making stupid mistakes with your pensions particularly. But in the run-up to that, you know, if I'm right, and wealth building really is about spending less than you earn, insuring against the worst, and then just saving and investing week in, week out, year in, year out, then you don't need an advisor to help you do that. And I'm trying, as you are, Damien, to equip the folks in the UK and beyond to understand this stuff enough that they can either go do it themselves, or they can seek advice and hold that advisor to account. Because nothing riles me more than professional advisors who don't care about their clients. And that was, to go full circle, that was a subject of the rant that I did on the podcast, which got me quite a lot of attention. So, you know, I believe that firmly. I think people can do it themselves with the right information, and that's what I'm been put on earth to do.
I heartily agree with everything you said there, Pete, because one of the big things with consumers and people who listen to this podcast and yours is trying to work out when they need advice. And it's that kind of grey area that actually a lot of the time people don't, and then sometimes they do. But what we tend to have is this world where we have the journalists and some, I'm not going to necessarily name them, but you all know because they appear on the telly quite regularly, and they'll be sitting there championing almost that you don't ever need financial advice. But then you have the financial advisors you were talking about, they're not so good ones, who will be making out you need financial advice all of the time.
Yeah, sure.
And it just seems to be a point where guys like us, I champion financial advice when it's needed. There are points when you need it and it is going to be value for money, and it's up to that advisor. But as you say, Pete, there is a lot that people can do without the advice. And actually, it's interesting that you had that part at the end of the book, and particularly about how you hold your advisor to account if you do engage with them.
I think it's so important. It's also worth mentioning that other than the retirement sort of piece, which is the obvious time, I think, to seek advice, sometimes life throws things at you. So maybe, yes, an inheritance or a premium bond or lottery win, or, redundancy sometimes, or a new baby comes, arrives in the family, and suddenly you need to think about actually, what happens now if I'm no longer around? It's not just me, or it's not just, my spouse or partner. There's now a small person that I'm responsible for. What do I need to do? What do I need to change? How can I save for that? So very often people present to me as a financial planner because something has happened. There's a single event that has come to their mind that made them think, I need advice at this point. But those, I think, will be fairly self-evident when they do arrive. For the most part, though, building wealth is slow and steady, repetitive, and a bit of a grind. And you don't need an advisor to help you with the basics. You just need to get on and do it.
No, and Pete actually, in one of the chapters at the end, lists some scenarios where you may want to seek advice. Pete, before we wrap it up, a couple of final questions. Have you got your book cover framed on your landing?
Not yet. It's going in my office. I'm having it blown up twice the size and framing it for my office because I'm narcissistic like that.
Am I right in thinking that you have a sibling that's written a book as well?
Yeah, my big brother Johnny, he's a social worker. He's 10 years my senior and still to this day is my absolute hero. And as fate would have it, he's written and had published a book on working with troubled kids. And he's a master at his craft, got an amazing reputation in his own field. So foster carers and sort of social work professionals are eating up his book and all the stuff that he's putting together. So yeah, weird, isn't it?
Yeah, that's fantastic. You've probably got a very interesting coffee table in your family home.
Diverse. We've got financial planning and dealing with troubled kids. Yeah.
Yeah, and then your dad's book's thrown in there for good measure. So Pete, here you go. How do people get hold of the book? How much does it cost?
Okay, the book is $12.99 and it's out on the 17th of September. Obviously, you can get it from Amazon and all the usual places. There have been some copies spotted in Waterstones already. They're a little bit early. But everything you need to know and everything you need to do, there it is again, is at petesbook.com. How happy was I that I got that domain? petesbook.com.
I'm impressed. petesbook.com, there you go. So, yeah. Pete, thanks for taking the time to chat about your book. I always like an excuse for us to catch up anyway.
Absolutely,
we need to catch up for a beer. Maybe we should do it and invite listeners as well. I'm sure there's a few listeners who would actually like to come to a pint the next time you are in London.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about doing that, and we should definitely do that together. I got a date in mind. We'll have a chat when we press stop here now. But mate, thank you so much for having me on. Do you know what? It says a lot about somebody to stick at something for 8 years, and for a good chunk of that time, you were doing it evenings, weekends, after hours, and stuff. So, mate, I'm in awe of what you're doing on Money to the Masses, and the world's a better place for everything that you're doing. I really appreciate the opportunity to sort of share about the book with your amazing audience.
Brilliant, thanks, Pete, and to the listeners, until next week. If you've got any questions that you want to ping to me, you can in the usual way. Money to the Masses with the number 2 on Twitter. If you want to get in contact with Pete, what are your Twitter handles, emails, or whatever you want to give out?
Cool. I'm at Pete Matthew. That's MATTHEW, or at Meaningful Money. They both come to me, really. Or I'm Pete at meaningfulmoney.tv.
Fantastic. Until next time.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Play. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.